Hello everyone, my name is Blake Alexander.
And I am Chase. Make more. What's yours?
And this is the Blake and Chase Show. How are we doing today, man?
I'm doing good today. I just came back from a meeting with Kevin Hart.
We've got a really great show planned for you all, as always. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about From Civil Rights to Hollywood, the Charles Black story, Part 3. This episode is going to cover some of the things he did after college as well as his acting career, so I'm really excited to jump into that. But first, we've got some things we want to let our audience know. Chase?
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ear. In addition to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeart, The Blake and Chase Show is now officially on YouTube. Please subscribe and I'll see you there.
So let me set the scene for you, right? Uncle Charles gets out of college and one of the first things he does is that he joins this newspaper called the Atlanta Inquirer, right? Now, we've got a little bit of a story that he told us, and what I think is really important about what you're about to hear is that it really sheds a light on the importance of journalism. Real clip.
Shortly after I was out of college, I started working for the Atlanta Inquirer newspaper, which was a newspaper that grew out of our movement. And the reason that paper existed was because the existing Black daily newspaper did not support our movement. The publisher editorialized against what we were doing and all of that. So we needed our own organ for the community. And we had been using flyers, you'd pass out and put them on windshields of churches, parking lots and all that. And there was a guy who had a newspaper in name only, but had a printing press, and he turned that over to the folk who supported the movement. And it ended up being the Atlanta Inquirer newspaper, a weekly newspaper, which still exists, 60 some years later. But it was a crusading newspaper during those days. And we were taking on all kinds of issues like police brutality and desegregation of facilities and all kinds of things. So my first real job was at the Atlanta Inquirer newspaper. And after I'd been there maybe 6 months or so, I became an editor. Let me mention a couple of things about the newspaper, the impact that the newspaper had. Personally, I had a column that I wrote. The Civil Rights Bill of 1964 was up for a vote. Our congressman at the time in the same seat that John Lewis was in, Charles Walton, who I had helped to get elected, the white gentleman, nice guy, voted against it. And I wrote an editorial in the paper called Free White and 36. That was his age. And the message was he didn't need a civil rights bill because he was free, white, and 36. And I, went through all this thing, and he changed his vote when it came back around and voted for the civil rights bill. And he credited my article with he was the only Southern white congressman to vote for it, and he credited my article for changing his mind. And I saw him about 2 years before he died, and he mentioned that article by name and told me again that that's why he voted for the civil rights bill. We were able to get a mayor elected through the newspaper. Ivan Allen was elected over the very racist guy, Lester Maddox, largely because of the efforts of the students and the newspaper, the editorials and the editorial cartoons we had. I was able to get a white policeman fired for police brutality through the use of the newspaper. We supported the efforts to desegregate the hospital, Grady Hospital, which I got involved in. A lot of things, And at one point, the mayor told me, well, the newspaper always came out on Thursday. And Mayor Ivan Allen told me once that the first thing he did on Thursday morning was to read the Atlanta Inquirer to see if he was in trouble, because we'd be on him, and keep him straight. So anyhow, that paper was a very important and powerful organ in the community during those days.
Given everything that Uncle Charles just talked about, I want to pose a question to you, Chase, and our audience. How do we think Uncle Charles' article would have impacted people today in the context of modern media? I think it's interesting that this editorial that he wrote was able to change Congressman Weltner's mind on such an important issue at the time. But I also wonder, if he had gotten that same article today, if he had read that same article today, would it have caused him to make the decisions that he did?
Well, I think that depends. Well, if you're gonna ask a politician about something that you want, it depends if he's gonna get him in trouble with like the media or the establishment or something like that. If it's something that socially acceptable and it won't get him in trouble with the establishment, then yeah, I would have signed it. But if it's not socially acceptable and would get him in trouble with the establishment, then no, it wouldn't sign. So I think it depends on the situation. It depends on the question. It depends on what you're asking of him.
I think it's definitely a great thing that in this particular situation, back in 73 when Kennedy released those bills, that he did have an open mind to the truth at the time, but you're saying that he wouldn't have an... You think he would have an open mind personally, on a personal level?
Well, it doesn't really matter what he thinks.
It doesn't.
No. Like,
Why not?
it doesn't matter what he thinks is because the whole thing's bigger than just one politician's own silly personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
What matters is that if it's socially acceptable, because this guy's a politician, so cowardly, because like being a coward is sort of in the job description. So, oh yeah, like I said, it really depends.
So you think he would have valued his personal status over doing the right thing? Let me ask you a different set of questions centered towards news feeds, the algorithms, social media, articles, Washington Post, New York Times, all those different brands and media outlets, all those different things. Do you think that the rise of personalized news feeds and algorithms lead to a more fragmented understanding of important issues in society? And what I mean by that is, of course, because there are a lot of opinions and a lot of perspectives now with podcasts, with talk show radio, there's probably a better chance that Uncle Charles' article might have gotten more attention in different spaces. But because of the speed that information gets out and the dissemination of that same information, you think there's a risk that meaningful articles like this one, like Free White and 36, would have gotten lost in the noise, making it harder to influence public opinion or a policymaker like the congressman?
Well, I personally think the whole thing about personalized news feeds, I don't think that's really the problem. That's a symptom. It's not the actual problem here.
And what is the problem?
The problem here is that no one really trusts anyone anymore.
Okay. All right.
More because a lot of people lie about everything. Like, we disagree about everything, like basic stuff. Like, we just disagree on everything. So if you disagree on everything, naturally, a lot of people you cannot trust. And if you don't trust them, then guess what? Now you have a personalized newsfeed. I don't think the personalized newsfeed is the problem. I think it's just something that just naturally comes out of it.
You know, Chase, I think people will often decide what they want to hear versus what might have actually been said. And I think that lends itself to things getting taken out of context so often, you know? You've got platforms like TikTok, you got YouTube Shorts. They're all based on short form content and clips. So if you have an interview, let's see, 3 interviews I can think of off the top of my head. There was the Nikki Haley interview that she did on The Breakfast Club. There was Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin. And then Monique went on Club Shay Shay and talked about Hollywood, I think, for a little while. So those are 3 interviews that have been circling around from different areas. And I guarantee you there's going to be clips on there. But people will probably be more likely to click on the clips and to watch a short section or a fragment versus listening to the actual interview. So I think nowadays people might have read Uncle Charles's article, and might have been more likely to take a single line out of context and highlight one part versus the whole of the refutation.
Well, I think that also depends on if the media or the establishment actually likes what they're going to say, then it's less likely that they're going to take it out of context. But if something they don't like, then they probably would take it out of context since they don't like the person who's saying it.
That's true, because people will often look at the messenger, but not always look at the message. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, of course, a messenger could have their own biases that could impact the actual truthness of what is actually being said.
And that is true. That is true. But I think people often look too much at who is saying what versus what they're actually saying.
Yeah, like what I always say, who's fact-checking the fact-checkers?
One thing that's also really interesting is that back then you probably had a limited number of outlets, and anyone nowadays can be an influencer. You know what I mean? I think that I predict that in the future, YouTube is probably going to have a streaming service of some sort. You know what I mean? I think it's crazy.
It's called YouTube TV.
You serious?
Anyone can be an influencer or do anything like that. You've got so many voices. I think that back then when you had a limited number of outlets, the truth of a situation was more valuable because it was all you had on an important issue in your state or county or the national
But let's
level.
not actually act like any of these people actually cared about what the truth actually was. But
What do you mean?
they lied back then. They lie today.
I don't know. You're probably right. I mean, there's always going to be biases. I'm not saying that that's changed necessarily, but I do think that the truth of a situation would have mattered more because there was so much less to look at. You know,
And-
you maybe only had
Right.
3 figures to look at
Right.
in the news outlets.
Yeah, and those
Now you've
three-
got 300. I think that the difference is it's so much easier to lie in media now versus back then. I think it would have been a little bit more frowned upon. Not to saying that lying in general doesn't happen in the media, but I think back then it would have been frowned upon a little bit more.
Right.
Because people valued the truth because there wasn't
'Cause
a
in
million opinions to look at like there is
Because
now.
in general, it's easy to lie.
Because it's what one person says and then where the truth is between the two.
Like people say it's harder for like governments and stuff to lie anymore, but no, I think that's insane. It's easy to.
And now I've got a question I want to pose to our audience. With the decline of traditional newspapers and the rise of online platforms, how has the business model of journalism influenced the depth and quality of reporting? And how would this affect the ability of articles to shape opinions like Free White and 36? You can leave a comment on our YouTube channel if you'd like to engage with us on this, or leave us an audio message on Spotify.
But after I left the paper, I took a job with the very first neighborhood service center under the Economic Opportunity Act, and that would have been in 1964, 64, somewhere about that time. I forget. But the first center to be open under that neighborhood service center to be open was right here in Atlanta on what is now Lowry Boulevard. And I was hired as a community organizer there at that center. And I went from there to the headquarters for the economic program here in Atlanta, and became the head of something called the New Careers Program, which was a training program for people to get jobs in public institutions like federal government, state, and city, and county, and the like. And I left there to go to work for the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Again, I was a civil rights enforcement officer for that. And I left that job to form a consulting firm called Frontiers Unlimited with John Lewis, Julian Bond, and Lonnie King, who was the first chairman of our student movement, who I succeeded. The 4 of us formed that firm in 1969, and I ran it for a little over a decade. I guess at the height of it, I had about 60 consultants working for me. Your mom came to work for the firm, as a matter of fact, and she worked for us for a while. She's one person that I told her then, and I've said to her many times afterwards, that if I ever inherited a whole bunch of money or won the lottery or something like that, I would put her in charge of it because I trust her implicitly. Mm-hmm. I trust her judgment, and I trust her integrity, and I would put her in charge of all that money for me. So that's that's kind of regard I hold your grandmother in. But anyhow, the consulting firm worked from California to New York. I was going back and forth to California twice a month. I was in New York twice a month, sometimes in Alabama, Des Moines, Iowa, Kentucky, and I estimated my flight mileage over a period of 2.5 years as being about 500,000 miles. And during that time, I wasn't taking any sky miles. I mean, it's just, I could be flying free for life, I guess, if I had, but I'd never do any of that. But anyhow, so I was in the air and on the road a lot during those days. But we worked with community action programs where that were involved with social uplift, manpower development, health, and did also some training with respect to race relations. We also trained advisory groups to become governing boards at various government funded programs. So we had a lot of success in doing all that.
What was Grandma's role in the company?
Oh, well, she actually was doing mostly secretarial support work, but I trusted her with everything too. She was actually an executive assistant essentially. Well, that later on she worked for the IRS, and she was the one that kept corporations straight, made sure they paid their taxes and all that. So she always had a good facility with numbers, but with people. She was a very organized person. So I trusted her with anything and took her advice, all the time on all kinds of stuff. I want to be just like her when I grow up.
Lonnie King emerged as a central figure in the American Civil Rights Movement during the 1960s. Co-founding the Atlanta student movement, King played a pivotal role in advocating for desegregation and civil rights. His leadership and strategic vision contributed significantly to the progress of the movement. In later years, King shifted his focus towards education, recognizing its enduring impact on social change.
Now, Julian Bond, if this wasn't obvious, he was known for his charismatic leadership. He played a pretty key role in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or STIC. His eloquence and dedication to justice made him a prominent figure in the civil rights struggle.
John Lewis, a revered civil rights icon, left an undeniable mark on history. His leadership in SNCC and pivotal role on the March on Selma underscored his commitment to nonviolent resistance. Lewis's courage and dedication paved the way for significant legislative advancements in civil rights. In his later years, Lewis transitioned to politics and served as a highly respected U.S. congressman until his passing in 2020.
Of course, Bond's contributions extended beyond activism. He later transitioned into politics, becoming a distinguished legislator in Georgia. In the latter part of his life, Bond embraced a multifaceted role, engaging in both activism and academia. You can't go wrong with those two. So I'll say this, right? I think it's fascinating that Uncle Charles and these very influential figures in history now, they just started this company together, All of them were probably friends, they all knew each other, and they came together and said, hey, there's different ways we can carry out equality. There's different ways that we can carry out our movement, and there's different ways that we can help by starting this firm together. They all come together and they do this great, amazing thing that our family has history in. I just think that's amazing, man.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So, Chase, obviously this series is called From Civil Rights to Hollywood,
Of course.
So we've covered civil rights pretty thoroughly up to this point, but there's one thing that we haven't really talked about yet, and that is Hollywood. That's the big main thing that we haven't touched upon yet. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We're going to touch on it today. So...
Tinseltown.
What? It seems that ever since we did this interview, I've kept seeing Uncle Charles in just movies. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just movies. And I'll get into this a little bit later, so I'm not going to spoil anything for when we hit that segment in the next bit. But one movie that he is in, which I've really enjoyed so far, and we watched this with our aunt at one point. It was called The Best of Enemies, and I'm not gonna spoil the movie because I won't spoil it for myself because we haven't watched the last 30 minutes. It's about this KKK leader or member and this other woman named Ann Atwater. She's representing this school, right? A school gets burned down and all these different things, and it's a really good movie so far. It's on Netflix right now. I recommend you watch it, and he's in that movie too, so I'm not gonna tell you when and where he shows up. But I thought it was crazy that he was, because we were literally like watching it, and then we see him like, hold on, who is that? And we're just kind of looking like, oh, there we go.
Yeah. Bob's your uncle.
To start off our conversation about all this, we started with the actor strike, the SAG-WAG, the whole, oh no, we're going on strike. That was a really bad thing, It came and went. Luckily, it's over now. I don't even know what deal they came to. I feel ashamed in saying that I don't know what the aftermath of that ended up being, but this was his take on it, and you can listen to that right here.
Well, there are a lot of projects that were underway that had to be halted. First, because of the writer's strike, and then when the actors joined in, that kind of shut everything down for sure. But there are programs that don't require writers that continue. The more reality type shows and all that, they can do stuff without without the writers. But also the unions can grant exceptions for some projects to proceed. That has been done in some instances. It's important to know too that there are a lot of independent projects that don't involve unions, and they're continuing to do their work. That also includes commercials, for example. Most of the commercials that are done around here are non-union projects. So there's that kind of work still going on. But overall, there has been a great loss of work for most actors and writers for the time being. We do believe that since both unions are out, that puts a lot more pressure on the producers to come to the tables and talk again. Now, the writers did attempt, the writers and the producers attempted a restart of their negotiations the other day, but they could not agree on terms before restarting their negotiation. So that both strikes continue at this time.
What made you want to get into acting?
Well, actually, it was by happenstance. Well, I was married 3 times, Chase. And so this is the way you designate the 3 wives. The first one was my baby's mama. Okay. The second one was my favorite wife, and the third one was my most recent ex-wife. Okay. So my most recent ex-wife had a daughter who's a PhD in healthcare management or some such thing now. But when she was like 10 years old, was in a play at school, and she had the leading role, and they videotaped it. So she decided she was going to be a star. So we lived on Ponce de Leon Avenue, and our mother enrolled her in an acting class way up in Marietta, which was a good distance away. So we would drop her off at the class and go and get something to eat or something to kill time and pick her up. And so the instructor suggested that we stay and participate in the class. Okay. Okay. So we did that. And the upshot of that was that I was the one that he encouraged to get into the business. And I didn't have any interest in doing that. But after like the third class, he kept suggesting, get some headshots done, put a little bio together, get it out in the hands of agents, and see what happens. And I did that. And within about a week and a half, I get a call to do an audition. And the first person I auditioned for was Reuben Cannon, who became a co-executive producer with Tyler Perry years later. But at the time, he was out of Hollywood and was a top casting director out of Hollywood, black guy. And it was for the role of a prison psychiatrist in a movie called Stay the Night, made for TV movie. And I was selected for the role, but the role got cut out because they didn't raise enough money for a 3-part series, and they only had the money to do a 2-part series. So I had to get that role. But before I left the casting agency, the casting lady asked me to go into another room and audition for another film. So she gave me some copy to read for a few minutes. I go in and audition for that movie, and that was called Carolina Skeletons, starring Louis Gossett Jr. And I was booked for that job, and that was my first acting job. So because I had gotten this movie role, I said, "Oh my God, I need to learn how to act." And so I had enrolled in an acting class after I had been booked as a principal in a union movie, which is not the way it normally happens. So in the first night of the acting class, the instructor said, I asked everybody to introduce themselves and tell why you decided to take the class. I said, well, I got this role in the movie. And said, what? That's not the way it happens. You work as an extra, you take a bunch of classes, and maybe eventually you're going to roll in the movie. But anyhow, that movie was a SAG, union project. So after 8 hours, you get paid time and a half for the next 2 hours and double time after that. And I had a 16-hour day. So I made a bunch of money. So I said, I could do this. And that's how I got into acting.
What do you think your ideal role is? You could have any role you want, any movie, any decade, time period, whatever it looks like for you. What do you think that would be? No limits.
I really hadn't thought about that, but the kinds of stuff that I enjoy doing the most, that I have enjoyed doing the most, was what they call playing against type. So when I first got in the business, I was a white collar professional kind of guy. Mm-hmm. So I would typically get cast for white collar professional kinds of roles, and I wanted to play some down and dirty kind of stuff. Yeah. So when I first got a chance to play a bum, and they would put on all these raggedy clothes and I got to roll around on the ground, get all dirty and muddy and stuff like that. Wow. So that was big fun. So, it was a matter of playing against type. So that's the kind of stuff I seem to enjoy the most. But if I don't know, I don't know. You and I will have to discuss that one day, and you have to advise me as to what kind of role that I should like to play. Now I have some movie notions in my head that I'm trying to get done, but I really hadn't decided for sure what roles I would cut out for myself. Now I'm working on a project. This T-shirt here will tell you what it is. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Rooftop Blues. It says.
I can see it.
Rooftop. Okay, I'm part of the board. And so I'm putting that project together, and it's based on a true life story of some people. And anyhow, there's a role that was written in there with me in mind, where I would be playing a prisoner who's serving a life sentence in prison. That's kind of fun. That's kind of a fun thing to do. Now, there's if you go online, you will find a series online called "Judge Me Not" that I'm in. There are 8 episodes that I'm aware of, and I'm in the first 6 of those. Now, there's some rough language, so it'll be a little rough on your tender ears, because there's a lot of F-bombs in there, and there's a lot of sexual content. So you have to plug your ears sometime and close your eyes. But I play a judge in that series called Judge Me Not. And I don't know if you've seen Disney's The Haunted Mansion.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, we've heard of it.
Yes. Well, I'm the organist in that, but you don't see much of me. But I'm at the organ in tails with the top hat, and
Really?
my tuxedo has 12-foot long tail on it. And they didn't show that nearly as much. You see me more in the promos and the trailer than you do in the movie, in my opinion. But anyhow, that's who I am in that movie. And I've been in this game now for like 33 years. And I've been in probably 100 or so different projects, including films and television series, and commercials and industrials. Those are projects that the companies do for their purposes. I'm up on billboards now around town. If you're going out on 75 North at the Howard Mill exit, you'll see a huge billboard with me and a lady on it for Northside Hospital. And there's at least one other that I know. So and you saw me in the Super Bowl commercial. You came over with the J-Lo commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so I've done a number of commercials and training kinds of videos, and also a program that's in more than 3,000 churches around the country about generosity. There are 3 5-part episodic things. One is called Living Generously, Leading Generously, Loving Generously. Are the 3 5-part episodes. And a lot of churches will play, one episode per Sunday, and the minister will build his sermon around that episode. And they have study material that they use. And I've appeared at a number of the churches when they're doing the 5th episode as a surprise guest and that kind of thing. But more than we're probably closer to 500,000 people have seen those products throughout the country and churches.
Who was your favorite co-star?
You guys ask really hard questions. I told your daddy I was going to have trouble because y'all asked a hard question. I worked with Mel Gibson. I was directed by Clint Eastwood. I worked with Tyler Perry, directed by him. Well, it's kind of a different experience in that he is a writer, director, producer, actor, all of that. And the projects that I was in were a couple of episodes of Meet the Browns and a couple of episodes of House of Pain. And these are things that he wrote, but he would not have somebody else directing, but he is there kind of over directing. But he would throw stuff out at you that's not in the script. He said, tell us such and such a thing. Or tell them, And so he just throws stuff at you like that, which is unusual for most filming projects that I've ever been on.
Tell us about the good, bad, and the ugly of working with Clint Eastwood.
Well, I didn't work with him a whole lot. It was a project called Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which was in Atlanta.
That one.
So, Yeah. Do you remember seeing me in that? I'm chairman of the Black Debutante Ball. Uh, I'm sitting at the table when the lady Chablis comes over to the table and sits in the young black guy's lap and all that. Um, but the thing that about Clint Eastwood's his sets were extremely quiet. Nobody was making a sound when he was on the set, and he would come in. He would whatever he would say to you, he'd say in a whisper to the actor directly. You never Nobody else ever heard what he was saying to an individual actor. The first thing you do, you said rehearsals up. So you rehearse the scene and you do it like you would do it. And he came over and whispered to me. He said, "Charles, I want you to do that exactly the way you did it." I said, "Oh wow, that's a compliment, Clint Eastwood. I did it like he wanted it done, without direction. It was cool. And he and I took a picture together. I had one of those cameras you get in the drugstore or something like that,
Mhm.
and it was a camera that was only suited for taking pictures outside with natural light. And somebody took a picture of the two of us, and it didn't come out. So I was heartbroken. All you could see was little twinkling of chandelier lights. That movie that I worked with Mel Gibson on is one of my favorite movies because there was an interesting thing, what they call a drop pickup in movie making. It was a union project. I was supposed to work 2 weeks with a week in between. Okay. So at the end of the first week, as soon as I got back home, I get a phone call. They said, "Hey, we need you here tomorrow for this scene."
Mhm.
So I go back on the week that I was not supposed to go back. And so when I got back, the guys, everybody say, "Oh man, you got a drop pickup." I say, "What's that? Is that good?" I say, "Yeah, man, that's good." So it turns out that I worked 3 weeks over a 3 month period. Okay, they had to pay me as though I was working the whole 3 months. You know something? Because the first week and the last week were total 3 months apart
Mhm.
total time. Instead of getting paid for 3 weeks, I got paid for 3 months. That became my favorite movie. Yeah.
Yes, it
Although I got
was.
shot in it. Right? Yeah.
I want to
Well,
ask you a question about Selma. What were your thoughts on that movie? Did it take any historic liberties? Because I know movies sometimes, depending on historical events, a lot will bend
yeah.
certain things or adjust certain things depending on what they're trying to get out. Did that
Yeah.
movie take any liberties that you noticed, or was it just accurate, do you think?
I think it was a fairly accurate portrayal. Um, what I didn't like is that I got left on the cutting room floor. I'm in the credits. I get paid. Matter of fact, I got a residual check yesterday from that movie. But my character was called an elder marcher, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm explaining to a younger marcher who Edmund Pettus was, that he was a Confederate general or some such thing, and the head of the Klan and all that, which is all the reason why his name shouldn't be up there. But they apparently had somebody else telling that same information in another scene, so they cut my scene out, which broke my heart because I told everybody I'm in the movie. But one thing that hardly anybody knows is that before all of that stuff took place in Selma, I was invited to speak to a mass meeting over there because I'd been chairman of the movement here. And the young man who was the first black uh, student at the University of Alabama, a guy named James Hood, invited me to come over and bring some other students to speak to this mass meeting because a lot of people were being threatened with being fired for trying to register to vote, teachers and all this sort of thing. So they packed this church, the same historic church, Brown Memorial, I think it's called over there, where all the action took place, is where I was a keynote speaker months before all those other people came in, and you had the bloody Sunday stuff. And I was telling the people that they're spies in the room, and they're going to be telling everything that's said here today, and you don't have to stand for this, and you don't have to stand for that. And I left town and had not been back to Selma until we did the movie 50 years later,
Ah,
hoping that nobody would remember me. But I helped to stir the crowd up, some months before. The stick people went in and did a lot of organizing after that, and then King came in after that, after they were already there. when he was invited in. So that's part of the Selma story.
What about the Rosa Parks story? I know that you worked on that film. What was your experience doing that?
Well, I played her grandfather when she was like a 10, 11-year-old girl. And I remember we were going fishing. I was taking her and her brother fishing. And she had run up ahead and saw a black man hanging from a tree who had been lynched, and she ran back to me, crying, and apparently that was something that she actually had experienced in real life, which probably helped to radicalize her to the extent that she was. So I had the occasion to play her grandfather in that movie. But an interesting story is some years before that, when they had the very first gala after King's death to raise money for the King Center and all that sort of thing. And my wife and I, my favorite wife, and I were there, and we were at a reception backstage before the event started, and Coretta Scott King was back there, and Harry Belafonte, and
Really?
Lena Horne, yeah, and my wife and I and somebody else, and we were standing around in a circle drinking champagne. Okay, well, my wife was standing to my right, is going goo-goo-eyed crazy over Harry Belafonte, who's standing over here, and I'm going crazy over Lena Horne, who was standing over there,
Mm-hmm.
and Rosa Parks was next to me, between me and Coretta Scott King. And because my wife is going crazy over Harry Belafonte, she accidentally bumps my arm,
Mm-hmm.
and my champagne goes all over Rosa Parks' beautiful gown,
Oh.
satin gown, and I just backed quietly out of the crowd, trying to disappear into the wall. And I told people that, I said, if she had known, if she had still been alive when that movie came around, she would have vetoed me playing her grandfather, remembering that I spilled champagne all over her gown. That was all. I felt really bad about that. That's the only time I ever met her.
He once said that when he was asked when, as an artist, did you decide to become an activist, he always responded with, I was an activist long before I became an artist. They both service each other, but the activism is first. What are your thoughts on this statement?
Yeah, and I'm not remembering a whole lot about his beginnings, but I know that he was standing up for himself very early on when he was attempting to do stage work and all that acting stuff. And he was a no nonsense kind of guy. He's from the Bahamas, and as a matter of fact, he had a brother who lived directly across the street from my dad's brother in Miami. And I know that he had a son named Kermit.
Mm-hmm.
His brother did, and Kermit and my brother had become friends. But when they grew up, their name was Portier down there. Okay, and I was having lunch with one of Sidney Poitier's daughters here. While he was still alive. But I'd had lunch with her a couple of times. But on this particular occasion, I asked her, "How did your dad's name, get from Portier to the next iteration was Poitier, and then it became Poitier."
Hmm.
She said affectation. So she was saying that her dad was, just kind of making his name sound fancier than it originally was. But it was Portier when I was growing up and knew his brother and his nephew.
Thank you for tuning into the Blake and Chase Show. We appreciate your time and hope you found value in today's discussion. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it with your network. We love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to connect with us on Spotify or Instagram. The Q&A question for this episode is as follows. With the decline of traditional newspapers and the rise of online platforms, how has the business model of journalism influenced the depth and quality of reporting, potentially affecting the ability of articles to shape opinions? You can leave your thoughts down below on our Spotify page, where if you scroll down, you can see a little section where you can type in your answers. One more thing, the article Free White in 36, we'll leave a link in the description for you to read that for yourself. You can find that on the Atlanta Inquirer's official website to this day.
It took a long time to set up and prepare this episode. We will be so excited for our next episode, but until then, sleep at last, sleep at last. Thank God Almighty we can sleep at last. This is The Blake and Chase Show, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, YouTube Music, CastBox, and Odyssey.
Follow and share our show if you enjoyed this episode. And for our YouTube members, subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. This has been The Blake and Chase Show. My name is Blake Alexander.
And my name is Chase Carter.
Thanks for listening.